Thank you very much, Raju. It's wonderful to be back at IFPRI, and I promise that this time I will not stay for 10 years. I want to congratulate Raju and her team here at IFPRI for taking this initiative, which I think is much needed. It is probably overdue, and it is an initiative that's going to make a difference in the lives of people, which is obviously what we are all in the business to do. When I received the invitation from Raju, she put in bolded letters, "You are to speak for 20 minutes max." So I have my watch in front of me, and I am going to stop after 20 minutes. Hopefully I will finish my presentation by then. But I totally agree with Raju's point, and she reminded me that in fact I have been arguing this many times, that shorter presentations are better than longer presentations. That is true for when anybody else speaks except yourself. Let me just remind all of us of the seriousness of the health problem in developing countries, particularly among low-income people. Look all the way to your right, and you see the life expectancy on the average in sub-Saharan Africa, slightly above 45 years, and then look all the way to your left, and you see the OECD countries somewhere around 77, 78 years. That's one indicator of the seriousness. Another indicator is the mortality rate among children 5 years or younger. And again, if you look to the right, you see the very high mortality rates among African children, and you look to the left, you see the very low mortality rate among the OECD children. Those are just two of many indicators that one could use to show both the serious absolute problem and also the tremendous distribution, the tremendous difference among countries and among people. Now, I've been arguing that the food system begins and ends with health and nutrition. It begins with health and nutrition because low productivity caused by poor health and poor nutrition results in low productivity of the food system. And I don't think I have to say much about the food system influencing health and nutrition, but I will spend most of the rest of the time talking about the specifics of that particular link. I'm not going to say much about the productivity effect, because that has already been discussed a great deal, and there's a lot of research that shows the very strong link between poor health, poor nutrition on the one hand, and low labor productivity on the other. So this is one way to look at the food system. It's a somewhat static way where you start with natural resources and inputs, and you go through the primary production, transport, storage, exchange, secondary production, transport, storage, and exchange. Again, consumption, health, and nutrition. That's not really the description I like. I like a description of a dynamic behavioral system which can be influenced, because it is dynamic, because it is behavioral, it can be influenced by government policy. But for the sake of this presentation, I stuck with the more static discussion, because the presentation is really not about the specifics of the food system as such. What it is about is, how does the food system affect people's health and nutrition? And one way that sets a one pathway, if you like, between the changes in the food system and the changes in the health status is by means of changing household and individual behavior. And in the big box, I'm showing, I just want to make sure that you can see what I can see. In the big box, it shows how the food system can influence health and nutrition by influencing household incomes, the level of fluctuations, the composition of the income, who controls the income. Certainly the relative prices are very important for what happens to people's health and nutrition, whether these are relative prices of foods or relative prices between food and non-food. Time allocation, particularly gender-specific time allocation, women's time allocation, can be influenced by the food system changes and in turn influence healthcare or health status. It can influence healthcare as well, but the health status in ways that may not be intuitively obvious. For example, programs and projects that generate more employment for women may in fact end up having a net negative effect on the health of the children for reasons that we can get into in the discussion if you like. But these relationships are much more complex than simply saying let's generate employment for women and then that would have a positive effect. That relates of course to the care that I mentioned a minute ago, to breastfeeding, and of course preferences can be influenced by the food system, which in turn can influence health and nutrition positively or negatively. Need I mention fast food preferences as one part of that picture. So what are the interactions other than what I have already talked about, the pathway through household and individual behavioral changes? Well, the obvious one, of course, is that the food system influences the energy balance and the nutrient intake of people. That, in turn, if those balances are not appropriate, are not correct, what we can end up with is growth retardation among children, particularly reduced disease resistance, and anemia caused, for example, by iron deficiency, blindness caused, for example, by vitamin A deficiency, and chronic diseases caused by overweight and obesity. All of these things, of course, being influenced by the food system, and all of these things influence the health status. I want to show this slide because in many of the statistics on the course of mortality or the course of illness, nutrition is frequently kind of hidden somewhere in these statistics. In fact, it appears based on the research that I've seen that the mortality associated with malnutrition accounts for more than half of all of the deaths. And it's the interaction between malnutrition and the illnesses that I have shown here that are going to make the difference. In other words, if these people were not malnourished, the mortality caused by the various illnesses shown in the outer circle would be much lower. That interaction is frequently left out in some of the statistics, and it's really important. The kind of malnutrition I'm talking about, of course, are hunger, hidden hunger, meaning specific nutrient deficiencies, and excessive energy intake leading to overweight, obesity, and chronic diseases. Some of the statistics that we use to argue about the to present the magnitude of the nutrition problem, these statistics are in fact based on item 1, on energy and protein deficiencies. So if, for example, we look at the FAO data that shows that today there are about 925 million children who are undernourished, what it really means is that 925 million do not have access to enough energy and protein. That is on the assumption that those numbers are correct, which is a different issue. But they don't really pick up on nutrients other than they pick up on energy and by association on protein, but certainly not on micronutrients. And there are statistics that argue that about 2 billion people suffer from iron deficiency anemia. I want to warn all of us that those statistics are at best orders of magnitude. We really don't know exactly how many people suffer from what kind of energy deficiency or nutrient deficiency. Another very important link or pathway between the food system and health, of course, is the food safety link. And food safety links very closely to water safety, sanitation, and hygiene, for reasons I don't think I have to go into in this audience. Obviously, you can't have safe food in an environment where you don't have clean drinking water, where you don't have a certain level of improved sanitation and hygiene. The contamination from the food safety, the lack of food safety, of course, can be microbial, they can be chemical, then can be toxic. by means of toxic metals. And I'd like to talk about E. coli, salmonella, and all of these things that we get bombarded with. Fortunately, the news media does pick up those things. I just came from a meeting in the National Academies of Science where we talked a lot about ecosystem health. And one of the arguments I made in that meeting, and I hope somebody was listening, which we can only hope, we really need to look at the interaction between ecosystem health and human health. That interaction needs a lot more attention, whether it's research or policy. And as part of that, we need to look at how the food system behaves and how that affects the health status through the various production systems, the processing systems. And I actually brought a cheat sheet here so I can talk about some of the things that are particularly important here. Certainly the use of pesticides and other chemicals, both pre and post-harvest. That usage can have tremendous impact on human health. So we need to be thinking in terms of integrated pest management, organic production methods. Can we agree on using genetic modification to solve some of the health problems or some of the potential health problems in the food system? Do we need genetic engineering? In some cases, I would argue that we do. There's a question of crop composition. For example, we did a study, or actually one of the students I advised at Cornell did a PhD dissertation to test the hypothesis that the Green Revolution caused iron deficiency anemia in South Asia. Why did we come up with a hypothesis like that? Because at the time of the Green Revolution's highlight, when the Green Revolution was on its highest, there was a dramatic increase in the consumption of wheat and rice because the unit costs of production in wheat and rice fell, and therefore the prices fell. But there was very little productivity effect in the area of grain legumes or pulses. And since we know that pulses has a high content of iron, the increase in iron deficiency anemia that we saw from different statistical sources in South Asia were in fact nicely correlated with the dietary changes away from pulses towards wheat and rice. But fortunately, this study was done by an interdisciplinary group. My PhD colleague was a nutritionist. She did a wonderful nutrition study and found that the hypothesis was wrong. What happened was that when you look at the total diet and you look at the amount of iron that's absorbed in the diet, particularly absorbed from rice and wheat, what you find is that the dietary changes away from pulses towards wheat actually increase the amount of accessible iron absorbable in the body. So in fact, the hypothesis was rejected. Could an economist ever have figured this one out? Absolutely not, at least not this economist. So that is another illustration of how we need to work together to understand the health implications, and in this case, the health and nutrition implications of the kind of things that we do in the food system. Then we got the animal production question, and we hear from time to time that factory farming, in the sense of having loads of animals in any one place, causes unsafe food. And then we hear from other sources that in fact having a few chickens in your backyard picking up all kinds of things is actually very unsafe as well. So we need much more research to understand the links between the production system in animal production and the human health aspects, whether they come about through food safety or in some other way. And when I start talking about zoonotic diseases, of course, these issues become very important, because if you sleep with your cow, there's a better chance that there's a transmission of zoonotic diseases from the cow to you. I'm not sure if it goes the other way, but I'm less worried about that. So how you interact with your animals is very, very important. And this is discussed further in this book that I'm going to promote towards the end of my presentation, where we actually talk a lot about the zoonotic diseases. One other PhD student that I've been working with at Cornell University, Anna Herford, and the first one, by the way, is Christina Nyhus, in case any of you know her. Anna Herford found a very strong link between production diversity and diet diversity in Ethiopia and Kenya. Sorry, Kenya and Tanzania. So again, sometimes these countries are hard to separate. Kenya and Tanzania. What she found was that higher diversity in the production system among semi-subsistence farmers resulted in higher diversity in the diet. Now, why is that important? That's important because diet diversity is very highly correlated with micronutrient intake, the degree of sufficiency or deficiency, depending on whether you want to be positive or negative on this. So that was, and yeah, if you think about it, sure, to the extent that what I produce, I consume, and if I produce different crops, I consume different crops, sure, makes sense. But these farmers were also buying and selling. And so anyway, so that's another kind of thing that we may overlook if we continue to operate in silos where we have a food system silo and a health silo, and there's very little communication between the two. This is the illustration of what I just mentioned, that agricultural diversity results in diet diversity in at least these three ways: the on-farm consumption, the availability in local markets, and the relative prices. Anna was looking at a number of orphan crops, as we normally call them, some of the vegetables that were not, that don't have a kind of a high status in the international debate, to look at how they could contribute to improved nutrition. Waterborne diseases, malaria, for example, in poorly constructed irrigation facilities, and a number of waterborne diseases. And again, if we don't take the health aspects into account as we deal with water management issues in the food system, we may be missing opportunities for improving health. Toxins and allergens, of course, they are naturally occurring, but we can also we can take some of the allergens and some of the toxins out through agricultural research or we can put some in. And this is something we have to be really careful about, particularly as we work on transgenic research where we're transferring genes. Does that gene carry with it allergens? Imagine, for example, that you're allergic to peanuts and that gene is transferred to a tomato and you don't know about it. You eat the tomato and you get sick. That's a hypothetical example. Of course, I don't think it has happened, but there has been the transfer of genes that could carry allergens with them, and the testing, of course, will make sure that these things do not enter the market, and if they do, they should be properly labeled, of course. I mentioned zoonotic diseases already. There was a study done not very long ago of 1,400 microbes known to cause diseases in humans. 1,400, that's a lot of microbes. 61% of these microbes were transmitted from animals to humans. So the conclusion is that, at least from this study, more than half of the, let me call them illnesses rather than health effects, more than half of the illnesses that humans are faced with, the risks that we are running, in fact occur in the animal kingdom. We can talk about flu or influenza, measles, TB, AIDS, mad cow disease, trypanoside, if I can pronounce that, I'll leave that for discussion. In the meantime, I'll work on the pronunciation. But there are a lot of zoonotic pathogens that we have to worry about. And this is also in a chapter in that book that I'm going to promote at the end of the conference. I'm promoting it now. There's a chapter on that which goes into details about how to avoid that kind of transmission. Drugs and medicinal plants, and here I'm thinking about illicit drugs and the health implications for producers and users, because even though they're illegal, they're still being produced. They generate income for poor farmers that presumably could have a positive health effect. Should we therefore promote that? Of course not. It's illegal. We don't promote illegal things, but it actually happens. So wouldn't it be nice to know more about what health implication those kinds of things have? And then, of course, we have the legal drug production, drugs from medicinal plants, and there's a great deal of that going on. It links, if you like, the food system and human health. And again, we come back to the question of what kind of research methods are we willing to accept? Are we willing to accept transgenic methods in this area, or can we get the job done without? The use of antibiotics in the production process. We are pouring antibiotics, and we are using antibiotics in healthy animals to make sure they don't get sick. That way we can increase growth of these animals and thereby presumably make a little more money. The problem with that, of course, is that it may generate resistant bacteria. And there's been some discussion lately on the MRSA transmitted from pigs to humans. Those are basically resistant to, I think, most antibiotics, if not all, but that's something that Bob would have to sort out for me. I still have 3 minutes, right, Rajul? Occupational hazards, we're going to leave that to your imagination. HIV/AIDS affects, of course, the food system in a number of ways, and we got the world export right here at IFPRI. Stuart Gillespie has written a lot about this. He's done a lot of research on that. It affects people in the productive working age, and therefore it would have health implications through their productivity. And of course, it affects the resistance to other diseases in the particular humans. Indoor air pollution related to cooking stoves and so on, very much part of the food system, and it links up to the health status. So here are the challenges to achieve intersectorial collaboration, because I hope that by now it's become clear that what I'm proposing here is that we get out of our silos and we start doing comprehensive system type analyses and policy advice. So we don't advise policy on the food system over here without understanding the implications on human health over here, but that we in fact take a systems approach, and that's what the book is proposing. The last chapter of that book is actually written by, among others, by, I think, Rajul, you are a, no, you're not a co-author of that. Okay, it was Joachim von Braun, Marie Well, and Stuart Gillespie. I'm sure you played a big role somewhere along the line, and they just didn't put your name on. So, what they're saying in chapter 14 is that here are some of the bottlenecks, here are some of the reasons why we don't yet have this comprehensive approach to solving the health problems using the food system, at least as part of the solution. Policy-making institutions are very silo-oriented. Funding is very silo-oriented. So is the training. Although we now have an IGOT program at Cornell, which opens up these silos. We are teaching the students how to do interdisciplinary research and policy advice. But most of the research is still in a silo basis. You can either do research on the food system or on human health, but it's hard to find funding or interest or training in doing the interactive. There are really very few incentives to focus on the intersectorial issues. If you want to publish as a researcher, you would try to go for the sectorial or for the disciplinary approach. If you're an advisor to the government, you are probably again going to be forced into a sectorial approach. Because we're thinking in sector-specific paradigms. That's what we've been trained to do, and that's what we tend to do. And there's competition among the sectors, of course. If you get money for one sector, you're not about to let the other one in and share. And of course, it's complex, and the capacity may not be there to deal with those kinds of complexities. And I am right on the dot 20 minutes, and I thank you very much for your attention. There are flyers outside that gives a summary of the book. The book is about the interaction between the sub-Saharan African food system and human health in sub-Saharan Africa. I was hoping to bring a stack of books and sell them to you today, but the book is not going to come out until next week. But I did manage to get the brochures, and they are outside on the table. Thank you, Rajul, for reminding me.